It always does this. Alright. Alright, hello there everyone, this is Mr. Brass, and this is another episode of the Brass Exchange. And this is a person I've had on previously on another podcast of mine, and she's back for another round. This is Lauren Ell from Atheist Republican. How you doing today?
Oh, that's Republican Atheists. I'm fine, thank you.
Since we last talked, there has been quite a few things that have changed. You're a mother now, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. I have a daughter now. She's about 2.5 years old.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah.
Because I remember you weren't even pregnant at the time we talked.
No, so I have been really busy. That's one thing I've learned now with being a mom, and it's a common discussion, is being busy. So I'm pretty much a stay-at-home mom now. And so my daughter has started going to preschool a few days a week, and so it's nice to have a little bit of a break. But even then, she's been sick multiple times, which happens with small kids who go to daycare. So been home probably a month or so due to her illness. Just pretty much colds.
Well, since you said you're a stay-at-home mom now, I'm just imagining hearing all the feminists yelling, saying internalized misogyny.
Well, I'm living in the far north of Sweden, so and where I'm living, it's in a very rural community. So there's really not many parents where I'm living, and I've actually have been pretty much very much alone with where I'm living. The parents who are here, they don't really communicate very much or meet very often, and so I really have only been able to learn more about parenting and so forth, mostly from like YouTube videos and magazines. There's not much resources here in the far north of Sweden for parents. It's a bit unfortunate.
Well, given the birth rate in Sweden, it's not, a lot of people, just aren't becoming parents in general.
Yeah, there's a birth rate decline in Sweden among the native Swedes, and up here in the far north of Sweden, which is more extreme climate. I'm in the Arctic Circle here. There's also been a decrease in birth here, and so there's two main cities where I'm located, Kiruna and Gällivare. And Kiruna, they actually it was probably about a year ago, they closed their birth clinic at their hospital. So there's only one birth clinic up here in the far north of Sweden. So there are parents who are really driving far to give birth. And there was another birth clinic that closed a little further south from me also. So that's something that is happening in Sweden, is birth clinics are closing due to low birth rates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that is becoming a sort of a problem with Sweden, like the government programs in Sweden.
Closures and what exactly? What problems?
The declining in the birth rate.
Yeah, it's it is an issue here, and mass migration was a big topic. It still is a big topic here in Europe. Many people coming from the Middle East and other countries. And I actually read an article a few years ago from a politician who was here in Sweden in the northern region, and he actually, this particular politician actually supported mass migration to Sweden because he said it will bring more people to our community, which I thought was really crazy, really, to think of, accepting immigration because it would bring more people to communities. Because Sweden is just like many other advanced countries, pretty much everywhere around the world, people from the rural communities are moving to the more populated communities looking for work and whatnot. And so there is a dwindling population throughout Sweden in the more rural municipalities. And so they're seeking more population growth. And the native Swedes are really just not providing it, again, because there's just a low birth rate. So there has been discussion of the positives of mass migration, of people coming from other countries to Sweden just to prop up the population.
Well, yeah, I mean, basically, it's sort of like what I see the Democrats here doing, where basically it is pretty obvious why they really want mass migration here. It's because they've promised all these government benefits to all these people, but they realize they're having a dwindling population, so there's less people to actually pay into it. So the idea is you mass migrate all these people here who have higher birth rates amongst each other, and that will pay for the benefits.
I think there is some similarities, and so I do tell people like Sweden should be looked at as kind of ahead of the curve, you know, when it comes to mass migration and immigration and so forth. And it has been very difficult here in Sweden for the newer residents here to integrate into society for various reasons. And it has been ultimately a toll on the Swedish welfare system. The Swedish government has changed a lot just within the few years I've been here. The right-leaning party, the Swedish Democrats, you know, 10 years ago, I was a foreign exchange here in Sweden. There's a political party, the right-leaning party called the Swedish Democrats. And I remember people scoffed at them and said, you know, they're just a small party. Because at the time, I was an exchange student in Sweden in 2006 to 2007 for 10 months. And the Swedish Democrats were very small. People here just generally degraded them. And now they are one of the most popular parties in Sweden. They've gained a lot of support, and they have partnered with a couple other parties in Sweden and have formed a coalition. So the politics have changed here a lot in Sweden, and it's actually cornered the left-leaning parties. It's cornered some of their plans. They've had to throw out some of their plans because the more conservative-leaning parties have been gaining so much support. So I like to say that look at Sweden as a country that's ahead of the curve. I know people will tell me, you know, you're living in Sweden, you don't know, people can be really rude to me sometimes as an American living abroad. And, you know, they'll say, you're not living in the US anymore, which I do go to the US for a month a year. I haven't done so for a couple years now due to coronavirus. But I can weigh in a lot on Sweden. You know, Americans who are living abroad are really important. They can weigh in on what's happening abroad compared to hearing what the media says, because the media will, you know, put their spin on it. But yeah, Sweden is very important to look at in terms of impact of migration, of mass migration, and how it will probably impact future politics. So yeah, what's happening in Sweden, it's really interesting, and I do foresee similar outcomes in the United States.
Yeah, I do. You know, that does actually surprise me that there's more of a rise in the right-leaning parties there. So, you know, I'm sure that you've been well aware of the fact that Trump is no longer in office, and now we got Biden in office.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
I
I
mean,
still say I'm still very much in tune with issues happening with the U.S., and so I manage Republican Atheists and communicate with people across the United States constantly. And here in Sweden, actually, American news is a very common topic in Swedish news. Whatever happens in the U.S., it's also news here in Sweden.
well, I mean, people also fail to realize the fact that basically the American military is the Swedish military.
Yeah, they have a lot of the Swedish military. I'm not so up to date with what they've been doing. I do know that Sweden has been investing more in its military in recent years, but still it's pretty embarrassing, I would say, for Sweden. My partner, who is Swedish, says that the Swedish military used to be very impressive, dating back to like the 70s, around that time. And yeah, slowly they just stopped funding the military here in Sweden. I read a story where the Swedish military actually had to take out equipment from a museum because they did not have up-to-date equipment. They didn't have the particular equipment they needed. And I thought, really? They had to take it out of a museum? I don't know. It's just not, in my opinion, kind of an embarrassing story for Sweden. But the U.S. military is here pretty often doing practices. They do practices here in the far north in the colder climates, and they're also in Norway pretty often to do practices.
Hmm. Yeah, I've always found that funny. Is like many of these nations, like I do know that some people, I know not everyone, of course, but I do know that a lot of people in the Nordic countries sort of just scoff their nose at Americans and America in general and say, "Ah, you guys are so corrupt over there." I said, "Well, our military is what's protecting you."
Yeah, I would say the U.S. definitely values the military much more than what Sweden does, and I really don't hear much about the military here in Sweden. I really don't see any type of patriotic events or anything that really draws awareness to the Swedish military. I have seen some recruitment advertisements for the military actually here. As I mentioned, it is starting to invest a bit more in its military, but still it's nothing compared to what it used to be in the past, from my understanding.
Yeah, I remember in our Twitter chat, I remember I went over like about the like how the Swedish, trying to think, some of the social security is there, where it's actually partly privatized.
Yeah, I wasn't able to get back to you about that. I've been meaning to ask my partner about that. It's not something I'm too well versed in. I'm not too well versed in the welfare programs here in regards to how they work. But I did mention that there is an increasing rate of privatization in Sweden. So there's privatized healthcare clinics, there's privatized health services that increasing numbers of Swedes are paying for. So, not only are they paying their high taxes for healthcare, but they're also paying for privatized services just to get faster healthcare. So one of my Swedish relatives here, she's actually paying extra for a privatized service. I think it's not that much. Right now, it's about, I think, under $100 a month. But with this service, she's able to actually get faster referrals, which that's one of the big problems here in Sweden and probably pretty much all countries with universal healthcare is facing. They're just facing longer wait times. If you here in Sweden, if you are, if you're in a dire situation like an emergency, then for sure they're going to put you to the front of the line and get things sorted out with you. But if you are a person dealing with maybe foot pain and it's not something that's going to kill you tomorrow, then you are likely going to wait in a long line to receive service. And so people are starting to pay for faster referrals. My relative who lives here in the far north is being flown to Sweden or to Stockholm for faster service because she has heart problems, which is a rather serious issue, but it's still considered something not serious enough to get quick care. So she's paying for extra service for quick care. But that is something that's happening in Sweden. There's just increasing privatized services that Swedes are starting to turn to just to get things done faster, whether it's for health or other issues that they have to deal with.
I think it's also because, like, I think the reason why is that there's such a high demand for the healthcare and stuff, and that if you have there's only so much healthcare that they can ration to people, and when you have a bunch of people demanding it, well, then you sort of do have to at some point have waiting lines.
I actually talked to a doctor who's in Norway, and she did mention that. She said that there are some people here, there's some people who are, how do you say, obsessive compulsive. And no matter how much you tell them you're okay, you're not sick, they will still create some kind of issue that they'll obsess over. And the system, the way how it is with it being quote unquote free, where you can just call them and call the health clinic, book an appointment, and have minimal expense, Yeah, there are some people who, they'll take advantage of it, and maybe it could be a mental issue on their part, but yeah, they can obsess over health issues, and that can take up a lot of time, take time from other people who have also issues to deal with. And the mass migration on top of that added a lot of demand also on the healthcare service. So a lot of people came into Sweden from other countries, from poor developing countries, who were dealing with their health problems. They had health problems that they weren't able to get treated in their country. So when they came to Sweden, it put more demand on the system. And so the Swedish healthcare system, it's really interesting to study. Universal healthcare in general is really interesting to study. And I think in general, Americans, especially the left-leaning Americans, they'll say, we need universal healthcare. And that's all they'll know. And, I'll say, if you look at how universal healthcare is going in other countries, it's kind of in a downward decline, and it's very concerning. But I tend to find many Americans tend to not care about those details. They just think it's automatically better than privatized services. So there's definitely pros and cons, I would say, to Swedish healthcare system. But I would say it isn't in a decline that is concerning. And so I do wish more Americans would talk about that.
Yeah, it definitely is something. Personally, in America, I would say that it's pretty hard to say we have a healthcare crisis per se. I believe it would be more accurate to say that we have a healthcare pricing crisis. But when I generally think of a healthcare crisis, I generally am thinking of, like, in terms of quality of care and the effectiveness.
Yeah, I think that's another issue, and that's something I try to discuss with Americans and the pro-universal healthcare Americans. I find it very difficult to just kind of get out of this concept of money. They're constantly focused on price, like, oh, well, it costs nothing for, practically nothing for certain procedures under the universal healthcare system. But I try to clue them in and say, yeah, but as I mentioned with some of my relatives here in Sweden, if you're not considered that you might die tomorrow, you're going to probably be on a waiting list for months. And that can be a waiting list for, just to see your general provider. So that's how it works. Kind of similar in the US. You go to a general doctor. Doctor's supposed to point you to a specialist to deal with whatever the problem is. So yeah, it can be months of waiting just to see the general doctor. It can be months to wait for the referral to see that specialist. I had to wait 3 months just to see a neurologist. And I had to drive 3 hours here in the far north of Sweden to go to a neurologist. And that was just for a 5-minute appointment where he really told me nothing, the neurologist. I was like, really? I had to wait 3 months for this 5-minute appointment that was 3-hour drive away. That probably could have just been done over the phone. That is something that's happening. The quality, yes, the quality, it's a big discussion. The wait times. And I've also talked to other healthcare providers here who said that the doctors here are just so swamped with work. If you read into the Swedish healthcare system specifically, I don't know why, but someone told me 20 years ago they got rid of their administrators here in Sweden. They got rid of their secretaries. So, in the US, when you call a healthcare clinic a lot of times, or a doctor's office, there's someone who answers the phone right away and tries to answer your question if it's a billing question or whatever. If not, then they'll book a time to call you back. Here in Sweden, they got rid of that secretary who answers you right away. It can take a whole day or days just to talk to the local healthcare clinic. And I think if Americans had to experience that, they would be appalled that just to get in contact with the healthcare clinic on the initial phone call, it can take days. I mean, it's taken me 3 days sometimes to get in contact on the phone with the healthcare clinic. I've said, do I have to actually go there in person, drive there, which is a 45-minute drive for me, just to talk to somebody?
Yeah, I mean, that does sound like a lot. I mean, people often don't ask because they'll point out that Sweden pays less, per capita, I believe, on their healthcare than America does. But I've said that's only a recent development in America. prior to Obama, America and Sweden were pretty even, with America even being slightly less than Sweden when it came to the healthcare per capita paying.
Well, that was one of the things that actually influenced me to become more interested in politics and to actually take more interest in the Republican Party was when the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare was installed, because I have epilepsy and I had a private health care plan before the Affordable Care Act was fully installed. I think that was around 2014. And I was paying about $75 a month for a single plan. I got really quick care when I needed to address seizures I was having. Was quickly diagnosed with epilepsy. I had a procedure done, EEG, really quickly in the United States. And I honestly, within a month, I was already prescribed medication. The medication was effective for me, thankfully. And I know that's one story. I know I've talked to many Americans who have, some of them had negative experiences, but some are like me who have had positive experiences where, you know, if the service was fast, the problem was solved. But when the Affordable Care Act went into full effect, my private healthcare plan was eliminated. And long story short, it basically forced me to go on to Medi-Cal in California, which I found to just be this, it was such a goose chase. Anything with the government is like a goose chase as the government grows, as it gets into healthcare, as it gets into all these services for the people. It's like so difficult just to get a competent person on the phone who can answer your questions. It's the same here in Sweden. You know, like I said, it can take days for me to get a hold of someone at the healthcare clinic. And then I'll talk to someone on the phone and they're not even competent. They don't know the answer to my question. It's like really, really frustrating to me. And so, yeah, the Affordable Care Act with my private plan being eliminated, essentially being forced to go into Medi-Cal in California, that was probably a starting point for me to take more interest in politics and start speaking out more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you know, so what people often don't realize is that, I mean, people will say, well, it's cheaper, so that means it's better. I'm like, I mean, in many parts of Africa, in impoverished parts of Africa, they pay nothing for healthcare. They don't have any.
That is an interesting discussion as well. I mean, when you talk about universal healthcare, so many countries have universal healthcare. So which countries are you talking about? And sure, many cases they'll talk about, you know, they'll say I'm talking about Sweden, or, you know, they're talking about the more advanced countries. But once, you know, it's true, if you talk about countries in Africa, if you talk about countries in the Middle East, they have universal healthcare systems installed as well that are doing very poorly. Mm-hmm. So, you know, in England, I've heard some horrific stories in England about their healthcare system, which is also spiraling downward. You know, there are still people who are very supportive of the concept, but they have longer wait times. I've heard that they have problems right now in England with their ambulance just to service people, that there's such a long wait line just to have an ambulance go pick up someone in an emergency. So yeah, there's a lot to take into concern. There's a lot more to the discussion than simply cost. There's also the quality, there's the wait time. It's a very interesting topic, and it's something, again, I wish Americans would just have a broader discussion about and think more about.
Yeah, and I don't know when it became legal in Sweden, but I do know, like, for a big thing in the United States for multiple years, of debate was on gay marriage. That was a big debate. I don't know when they legalized it in Sweden.
I'm not exactly sure. You know, issues like that aren't a really big deal in Sweden. As you probably know, Sweden is a very secular country, and so they tend to be very progressive on issues. People in Sweden do not make such a big deal about issues like gay marriage as much as what Americans do. And sometimes it's something I admire a little bit about Sweden, is because sometimes gay marriage has never been such a big issue to me. I grew up near Palm Springs, one of the most gay-friendly communities in the United States. and I just never saw it as an issue. So there are social issues in Sweden that are not such a big deal as what they are in the US. And sometimes I wish the US would be a little bit more like that, just and focus more on the more pressing issues such as immigration, education reform, and so forth.
Yeah, I know, to me, the only, I've always been a strong supporter of gay marriage. When I was growing up, I was strongly liberal. I didn't really become more right leaning until I was probably about, I don't know, maybe about 19, 20 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I don't even say right, I would say more moderate than anything. But yeah, that's how my backstory went with it. And the only real problem that I ever really saw with the gay marriage thing is not so much the gay marriage itself, but what some activists were trying to do with gay marriage. Like,
Yeah,
bas- you know, like a thing that they were trying to do is try to use it to undermine fathers' rights.
well, I think that that's also an ongoing issue within the gay community itself, from what I've heard and seen in conversations. And it's also an issue. Well, for example, the rainbow flag, which I grew up near Palm Springs, and I grew up seeing the rainbow flag, and it was a symbol of the gay community to me. But the left-wing community has taken the rainbow flag and has plastered it everywhere, and it's become, even here, especially here in Sweden, it's become like a corporate theme. And I think I've seen similar in the United States. Like businesses have started putting the rainbow flag onto their advertising. It became this big display. And I think it really watered down what the gay community is about. And also I've heard from conservative gays that they are not included in the conversation, much like is happening in many communities. The conservatives are being pushed out, and so the left-wing activists, the left-wing groups, they've taken the rainbow flag, they've plastered it everywhere. They make it like as though they're the only ones who care about gays. Yet at the same time, they have pushed out the conservative gays. This has happened in the atheist community as well. And so, yeah, I would say that it has been exploited by the left. They think that they're the only ones who can talk on the topic. They think they're the only ones, and that they have exploited it for their other issues. So now the rainbow flag is associated with Black Lives Matter. It's now associated with a lot of left-leaning principles, climate change, and so forth. And I feel very frustrated about this and kind of sorry for the gay community that now they have to deal with the baggage of, oh, if you have that flag now you are also assumed to be a Black Lives Matter supporter. You're assumed to be a climate change fanatic,
I remember, well, I mean, the thing is about it is like, I would not say, I was more of a skeptic towards climate change until also recently. Not so much that I denied it, so as much as I was just not really up to date with the science on it. But I do think it's sort of bad about how people on the left go about accusing Republicans of not caring about the environment, when the fact of the matter is like the left were the ones that were against nuclear power and making a bunch of anti-scientific statements about it, even though currently speaking, nuclear power is the most cleanest energy we have.
Right, and that is an issue, and that's an issue here in Sweden as well. That's ongoing right now with the nuclear power plants that have been shut down, and as a result, there's been power shortages, and primarily in southern Sweden. It has created some conflict with having a more modern way of living. My issue with the climate change really is that, for example, it is used to push policy that just increases taxes on citizens and ultimately funds certain corporations that are in the green field. So, for example, when I lived near Palm Springs, California, I lived up in Joshua Tree. There were a lot of solar companies that would come out to the desert and they would cut corners. They wouldn't tell the community, "Hey, we're going to be building a big solar field here, like a big solar project." They would just start. These solar companies would come out to the desert. This was when Obama was in office, and so they were getting funding from the Obama administration through some kind of environmental initiative. I forget exactly what it was called. But they come out to the desert, they start just clearing the desert, taking habitat out, and I actually would communicate with the environmentalists there, and they were really frustrated. So there's this clash in the environmental community, I would say, because here's these solar companies coming in. They are saying, we're building solar so that we can have renewable energy, but they go out to these small communities, they cut corners, they don't communicate with the community, and they start tearing out the desert habitat, the plants and so forth, and they don't even tell people. People learn after the fact. They're like, "Oh, the county granted permission to this solar company," but come to find out they're not doing things legally. And so it comes down a lot to money getting into the hands of certain companies, of certain corporations who are advancing their green projects. And it can get into some pretty hairy situations with communities and so forth. And so that's one of my big issues, is just the taxation it's putting on society. And is it ultimately really helping society in the long run, or is it just turning into some big corporate, back office money exchange?
Yeah. A problem that I know that in Sweden, just like pretty much all the other Western countries, education is a big deal that's being talked about a lot. A thing that I'm glad is getting a lot of attention is the notion of school choice.
Yeah, I've heard that in the United States. Well, in the United States, yes, and here in Sweden as well. It is becoming an increasing issue in Sweden. So again, with the impact of immigration, and we see similar things. In many ways, I view Sweden and the U.S. very similar. There are a lot of issues happening that are parallel. So here in Sweden, it is also a problem with students who do not speak Swedish fluently. They don't even speak English fluently. And they're being put into classrooms with the native Swedes, and it's supposed to create this atmosphere of equality. The students who can't speak the language are being put with the other students who do speak it to make them feel like they're together. But at the end of the day, it is making the classroom very difficult for the native Swedes to work in, when so much attention, the teacher's having to allocate so much attention to the poorer performing students. And so there has been an increase in interest for parents to seek out schools that they think are ideal for their children.
Yeah. And, it's especially becoming hard on men when it comes to education. More men are dropping out of high school. Not as many men are going to colleges anymore. And if they do go, they're only there for a couple years and they leave without ever getting their degree.
Well, I generally have read that the school, I also think this as well, that the classroom is more favorable to women. It's more favorable to the traits of women. I think for girls, it's much easier to sit at a desk, be quiet, and to just read a book or pay attention. Whereas for boys, they are much more energetic, interactive. And so, there's been issues there.
And, it's the fact that there's not really that many male teachers. I mean, and, men are good at teaching men, and women are generally good at teaching other women because that's the perspective they have. And, when you don't have a lot of male teachers around, you're going to have some difficulty in communicating to boys.
I haven't been following issues specifically in the education system in the US or Sweden when it comes to communication issues like that. But I just generally know that the education system is facing a lot of hardships, that there is a high turnover of staff, and as a result, staff are not hanging around very long with the students. Principals are changing constantly in schools. It's a huge problem. The education system in general, what the challenges that they are facing with student behavior, again, communication is a big issue. And then at the same time, you have teachers unions demanding a lot on their part to defend teachers. And now with the coronavirus, I'm just like, I have had an increasing interest in homeschool. And here in Sweden, homeschool is not an option. So parents cannot homeschool their children here in Sweden. But in the United States, it's obviously still an option. And I had just generally read parents have become increasingly interested in homeschool. And there's been a lot of opportunities for homeschool that have propped up to give parents more opportunities because, a lot of parents, they're fearful about homeschool. They're busy with work and so forth. But I have generally heard from parents that there's a lot of versatile and how do you say, like more, there's just all kinds of programs available so that homeschool is possible for parents. So that's really interesting to me too, is the increase of interest in homeschooling.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's also bad that you have when you don't have homeschooling as an option, because you're effectively just saying that you're not just saying that women, you have the option to work and you can be a stay-at-home mom. No, it's like when you don't have homeschooling, you're pretty much telling, no, you have to work at a corporate job.
Yeah, I think I really hope this is a change that will happen in Europe over time, is that homeschool will become more available to parents. And I know that there's been a lot of conflict in European countries in regards to Islamic extremism when it comes to homeschool and also to private schools. I think it was in France. They've had many Islamic terrorist attacks there. And so it has become an increasing a conversation about education and how to weed out Islamic extremism in education and how to weed it out also, I think, in homeschooling options. So that's an issue, is religious extremism. And I know that's an issue also in the United States when it comes to homeschool. But I think that, there's increasing numbers of parents who are just run-of-the-mill parents who, they're not radical religious extremists. They just want an opportunity for their child outside of the public education system. And so, yeah, homeschool should be an option. It would give families much more opportunities to raise their children in a way that they think is ideal.
A thing that people don't know is, like, with the growing number of fatherless homes, I mean, it's really becoming that is showing a breakdown of the family unit.
That is an interesting topic. And so Sweden is also really interesting on that topic. And there's a documentary that I recommend. It's called The Swedish Theory of Love. It's available on YouTube, I think. But anyway, it's a really interesting documentary because it gives insight into the Swedish society, and it gives insight into the Swedish household and how, yes, there's been a decrease in birth rates in Sweden, but in regards to births, there is also an increase when it comes to the births, an increase in births that were done through self-insemination. And so there's actually women who are just choosing to bypass the relationship challenge altogether, of finding the ideal male partner, or maybe they just have not they haven't found the right person, but they decide, the women are able to decide, I still want to have a child. And so there's been an increase in self-insemination in Sweden. And from what the documentary showed, it seems like it's very easy to just call up a sperm bank, choose the sperm, whatever traits you want, from hair color to personality, because men donate their sperm. They record all these traits about that particular male, and women can just brief through like like they're ordering through a magazine. Oh, what kind of hair color do I want? What kind of eyes do I want? And that's becoming more popular, to just for women to become pregnant without even having a father from the very start.
Yeah. Well, I mean, another thing that people don't take into consideration is the fact that cultures are different when it comes to parenting styles. Um, like I know in America we do make a big deal, and which is it is rightly so a big deal, about how minorities, especially black people, are have it really facing a father shortage.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, what people generally, people will blame racism for that, in which there might be a case to be made for that, but people fail to realize is that this was a trend in Africa before the slaves even got here.
Mm.
Because like in Africa, like the areas that where the slaves came from, especially, they generally had a sort of kinship model of parenting where it was more of a entire family ordeal where the parents would leave some of the parents would leave their children with another member of the family or the member of a tribe while they went out and did things. And it wasn't uncommon in that sort of relationship where the men weren't around as much. The kids were sort of just bounced around the entire family. It was sort of a communal system.
That's kind of an interesting topic to research. Yeah, when men aren't very present in the household, research how far that goes back. I actually haven't thought about that before, but yeah, I would say in the more modern society. So I think with the onset of the modern feminist perspective, and change, the documentary I referenced to, the Swedish theory of love, actually goes into a little bit how this began to happen in Sweden. How Sweden, for a long time in the 1900s, it did value the traditional family household of a father figure, a mother figure, and that type of situation. But it was with the onset of I think it was like in the 60s and 70s, the onset of the modern feminist perspective. And this perspective also, it wasn't just simply the feminist perspective, it was this perspective to have people pursue their own desires. And so the concept of the traditional family household, that's kind of a concept of people relying on each other, like the mother's relying on the father for the income, the father's relying on the mother to take care of the household and the children. So the goal around the 60s and 70s was to eliminate relying on each other and to create more of a system where people pursued their own personal dreams, their own personal desires. And that also included the more feminist perspective. And so from then on, that was, I think before then we were kind of seeing this change happening with the Industrial Revolution. Women started entering the workforce and so forth. But around the 60s and 70s, definitely around that time was when there was a big change in the Swedish society. Yeah. Women started focusing a lot more on their goals. Men started focusing on their goals. Family became less of value. And so now you look at, generations later, decades later, yeah, we have a decrease in birth happening. We have a decrease in father figures in households. And yes, you can say, well, it has race, has something, but you see it even in the white households. As I said, there's women who are opting for self-insemination to give birth just to bypass finding a partner. So from the beginning, their child does not have a father unless maybe down the road the mother finds a partner she likes, and that kind of can serve as a father figure. But from the beginning here now, this is kind of a trend happening children are just being born without fathers in the household. So it is really concerning. It's a very concerning issue.
Well, I mean, what people generally don't know is like men are one of, like, fathers are one of the they're a strong part of the family, but they're also the weakest link in the family in a way, because you know because for the instances is a man has to work harder in order to have the same paternal relation, like the story. I'm trying to think how to word it. Men have to work harder to have the same sort of parental intimacy as a women do, because women are the ones that uh, obviously they're very intimately tied to their children for literally 9 months, and
But yeah, in my perspective, though, I think that's just the way it is biologically speaking. Women
I mean, I'm not
are
saying like
the
so. For women, they don't really need to have the intimacy of with their children like that to be enforced as much, because they already have a head start on that by 9 months. That's sort of the most intimate relationship a mother and a child can have.
But I don't see any getting around that. And now, now, especially with me being a mother, I can see, and now I'm reading more like mom blogs and things
Well,
about how children react.
I mean, there's no way to get around that, like the motherly thing, but what we could do is give a more father positive role to men. So that way, you can have men catching up to women and having that sort of intimacy much better.
Well, I guess in my own household, my daughter, she's around me a lot. She's been around me since she was born. But I'll just tell you that when her father comes home from work, she is immediately drawn to him. It's like a magnet. She's just like, "Oh my God, daddy's home." And then from that moment on, she wants to only play with him, to the point that when he's in the room and I walk into the room, she says, "Go away," and closes the door. And I've read that this can be kind of common for children because, she's around me so much, she's around the mother, and so she's really used to me. And so when the father comes home, he is like a new person in the household. He's like, "Oh my goodness, it's someone new. Daddy's home." And so I guess from my perspective now of being a mother and seeing it with my child and reading similar stories of children who are drawn to the fathers, I think fathers are probably more important than how you're making it seem right now. And I do think that men should partake more in activities, and they should be welcomed more to, I don't know, going to school activities or taking the children out on their own terms and so forth. But I will say that I guess from my own household, the father is very important to the child. Even if she was around me, even if we had, I was breastfeeding her for a whole year, the father figure is still very critical.
Well, yeah, I mean, when we talk about fatherless homes, I mean, we often generally look at it from the perspective of boys and how they are, but it's also bad for women as well.
I think so. I think the father is so important for both genders, and generally speaking, men are more likely to be more. They tend to. I guess I speak with my partner. I admire my partner a lot. He's much smarter than me when it comes to so many things, and so I'm really glad that he's the father of my children, because he's just much more technical than I am. He fixes things. He understands things, and that's generally a trait of men. That is why men are more likely to go into engineering. They're more likely to go into more scientific fields, mechanic fields, and so forth, because they tend to just understand more about how to work with components and fix things, and they tend to be much more direct compared to women. And so with him, I can definitely see that. He can fix our car. He has amazed me. And I'm like, it's really cool that my daughter gets to have this type of father, because me personally, I can't fix anything. I'm I'm a much more social. I think I definitely fall in line more with the typical women traits of more social, more of a household person, more of a, community person.
Yeah.
But with the father, in our case, he is the technical person. He's the person who is just able to look at something and figure out what the problem is, get to the point. And I'm really glad he's there to fix things. Because if it was just me as a single mom, I would be so lost. I probably would be spending so much money on services for a mechanic, for so many things. I mean, he's fixed my hair dryer. And it's
I mean,
like, I've saved a lot
yeah.
of money for that.
I mean, what people often don't realize is like, men get into that thing often because of women, because that's often a thing that women want from them is to be able to know how to do those things. And so men get into the fields so they can better help their families out.
I think so. And I think that is also something that it is a disappointing thing happening over time is that men, men are kind of losing touch with that aspect of being able, I'm not saying all men have to be that way, but like I said, women tend to be more social, community oriented. And I would say, generally speaking, probably cannot figure out how to fix certain things. Whereas, like I said, men tend to be more in tune with that. But yeah, there has been a decrease in men taking interest in those subjects. And it can relate maybe to what you're talking about, that there's been a decrease in value of the family, of the traditional family household. I think there's been a decrease in trying to impress women, and this, again, is for many social changes that have happened for the last few decades. And so, yeah, it's coming harder to come across men who can help and assist with certain things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and we touched on this a little bit before, but, you've been obviously talking to people in the atheist community. And, I've seen you interact with your good old friend Hemet Mehta.
Yeah.
Mm. And it is funny how I do see you going back and forth with your fellow atheist on when it comes to politics.
Well, a little bit of background with me and being involved with the atheist community. I I'll just say, I became atheist when I was 18 years old. I had no idea that there was even an atheist community in the United States. I didn't when I was 18, so that was around 2006. I had never heard about American Atheists. I didn't know that there were atheist groups in the U.S. or I didn't know who Richard Dawkins was. I didn't know who Sam Harris was. I had read the term atheist when I was a theist, and it just was something that stuck in my mind. And so at 18, I just decided to become atheist, and I have reasons for that. I don't really want to get into, but yeah, as time went on, I did start to learn about atheist groups, and I started to learn about American atheists and so forth. And I was really disappointed in these groups. Like, I went to an atheist meetup group in Southern California when I was about 20, I think I was 21 or 22. And I had this immediate assumption. I thought, oh, wow, it's an atheist group. They'll probably be my best friends, or maybe we'll have a lot in common. And I went to this group, and I just found it to be kind of a shallow group in Southern California. Right when I went, they were already having conflict. They told the group right off the bat, they said, we're splitting into two groups. And I was like, okay, that's not a good sign. I'm not really into drama like that when it comes to groups. And so then from then on, I started to find more about like atheist Facebook groups, atheist bloggers, and so forth. And I just always, I started to have a problem as time went on. And I felt like the atheist groups just had, I felt the conversations were very close-minded. I did not really like a lot of topics that atheist bloggers talked about, and I felt they were constantly targeting Christianity, which was never a foundation for me to become atheist. When I became atheist, I didn't become atheist to target Christianity. I really had no grudge against Christianity. And so, yeah, that's kind of a little bit of background as to how I started speaking up as an atheist, because I wanted to give a perspective that was a little different from what American Atheist was presenting, or Hemet Meta, or, I wanted to showcase a different kind of atheist. And I have found some atheists who can relate to me. Not so many. It's kind of difficult to communicate in atheist groups, but there have been some people more, we say live and let live atheist. And so, yeah, it's been fun to speak up in the atheist community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is sort of, it is always fun, because I've actually that is actually why how I found out about you. Is I was, looking up atheists, Republicans that are identified as atheists, and eventually I found out about, well, first I found Atheist Republic, which is not anything about republicanism. It's a more of a far left group of atheists.
Mm-hmm.
But I eventually ran into you, and I also said, "Oh, this would be interesting because you're also a woman, and that's also pretty rare in the atheist community, because men tend to be less religious than women."
Yes, yeah. From as time has gone on, and I've communicated in the atheist community, and even in the conservative arena, I'm kind of a unique person. And as time has gone on, I don't make a big issue about it, but it is nice to come across people that I admire. And so there have been some atheists that I've come across that I admire immensely, who have passed away or are still living to this day. But you don't hear about them in the atheist groups, because atheist groups tend to be very left-leaning. They will shut out conservatives. They will shut out Republicans. When I launched Republican Atheists, I assumed that groups like American Atheists would say, "Oh, great, we've been waiting for atheist Republicans to speak up. Why don't we do an interview with you or feature you just to share with our following?" But I have found that these atheist groups, they systematically, it's like by de facto, they want to shut people like me out. They want to keep this narrative that atheists are left-leaning. They only will feature atheists that agree with the general perspectives that they have, these organizations. And I have different theories for that. I think that organized atheism in general, I think, has been on the decline as time has gone on, even if society is becoming more secular. So I think that atheist organizations, existing ones, have become more left-leaning as time has gone on, just to get more into the trending political discussions and try to stay relevant. Because atheism in itself is not a very interesting topic. It's simply lack of belief in God. That's it. There's no atheist manifesto. There's really nothing to debate about it. It's a very simple perspective. And so,
well, I mean,
yeah.
unless you count the Communist Manifesto as the Atheist Manifesto, then that's completely different.
No, I don't consider the Humanist Manifesto either to be representative of atheists. I think that atheists are the atheist perspective. I don't even really like to say atheism, because I always feel like the ism at the end adds this idea that it's some kind of belief system. But really, it's just very simple. It's just lack of belief in higher spirit. That's my perspective. Now, I have debated with some atheists who have a different perspective of what atheism is, and they'll say atheism is left-leaning, or atheism is humanism. I do not agree with that. I think atheism is simply lack of belief in a higher spirit. And so when atheists start getting into humanism or left-leaning perspective, that is latching onto just another belief system that is valuable to them.
Well, I personally believe that a lot of these atheist groups are more reactionary groups. They were specifically created in order to combat, conservative Christians.
From my perspective with American Atheists, I would say so. With Madeleine Murray O'Hair, which it was interesting to read about her background, and I didn't know it was a few years ago, I read that it is stated that she actually attempted to defect to the USSR, to the Soviet Union before she launched American Atheists. And she was pretty involved with a socialist workers' party when she was younger. And so I have never really had a great, perspective of her for that. There are other atheists that I have much more respect for.
Like Ayn Rand?
Yeah, Ayn Rand to me is a really important atheist woman that I think you don't hear atheist groups recognize her, really. Especially with them being left-leaning, she is the devil. And so, but I find it really unfortunate because she was such an impressive person to me, reading about her background of coming from Russia, if you know her background, coming to the United States, being a woman at that time and an atheist, and having the popularity that she did. And to this day, I would say she is the most hated author by the left. I mean, I'm constantly seeing content being put up to this day demonizing Ayn Rand.
Outside of George Orwell.
Yeah, but I think she is probably the most hated author I've ever come across by the left. And so that's another thing that I appreciate about her, and she really made a big impact. There's an atheist named Jillian Becker who is still alive, and she manages the blog The Atheist Conservative. I really think she has a great background. She played a major role in terrorism research. She launched an organization in the UK specifically to research terrorism. She actually went abroad to places that were war zones to collect information and try to piece together information about who was behind terrorist activities and war activity in those areas. And she recently got some press because I don't want to get so far into detail about this, but her organization sold their archive to the University of Leicester, which is in the United Kingdom. The agreement was that the university would preserve the archive of terrorism research, but recently we discovered that the university had the archive had vanished, all of this terrorism research. I hope this gets a lot more discussion because this is such a setback, I feel, for terrorism research today also, is her research. But my point is it was done by Jillian Becker, who is an atheist, and she also identifies as conservative.
I also know of Heather I don't know if you know her, but Heather McDonald.
Heather McDonald is really impressive, and she is another atheist that she calls herself secular from what I've heard, but I communicate with her occasionally. She is so impressive. I mean, her research on crime and her research with police and so forth, she's amazing, and she's done so many interviews on various podcasts and news outlets. She is really impressive, and she is an atheist.
Yeah, I mean, being in the men's rights groups like myself, I've found a great majority of it is, funny enough, comprised of male and female atheists with conservative to libertarian leanings.
Which groups were those?
Men's rights groups.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm not in any of those groups, so I don't know the general perspective from people in those groups.
Well, I mean, my last interview, it got pulled from YouTube, but it was with a woman. I believe she's an atheist, but I don't know that for sure. But she's a part of a men's rights group and called the Honey Badgers. And I talked to her and we discussed for like 4 hours about politics and stuff like that in regards to men. And
well, I have heard that there are more atheists that are popping up in Republican groups. There's more atheists popping up in conservative groups. And but the thing is, they're not very organized. So there's not really many organizations that are representing conservative atheists. And so, yeah, you'll find them in groups, maybe as individuals, but it's kind of hard to present this to the public. And, so the left-leaning groups will continue to demonize the Republican Party as being a religious party and so forth. But, yeah, there are a lot of atheist conservatives that, again, are coming out of the woodwork, and they are involved in Republican groups. They are involved in conservative groups. But at this point in time, I would say the two organized organizations representing atheist conservatives are my organization, Republican Atheist. Then there's another organization called Atheists for Liberty. And so, yeah, and this has happened within just the past few years. Like, I launched Republican Atheist in 2017. There's been a lot of people who have contacted me who have said, oh, thank you so much for starting this group. I thought I was the only atheist Republican. But with these two organizations propping up, I see, yeah, and as you're pointing out, there's more atheists in these more conservative leaning groups. There are a lot more atheists out there in those groups than what people think.
Yeah, trying to think. It's just very interesting because lately, the fact of the matter is that women voters actually outnumber male voters, and that has led to what many men feel is that they're sort of being left out of the discussion about benefits, and they're getting their problem solved.
I'm not too familiar with that topic. With the male benefits, what do you mean by that?
Well, like, I'm trying to think, like, when it comes to schooling, for example, men are, being more targeted, like, being denied more educational opportunities in favor of giving women more educational opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's the case in Sweden, but I know that's the case in America, where
I think I have read some statistics where there are higher rates of women obtaining degrees and so forth, and it kind of makes sense to me. I generally think the classroom is just better suited for women. It's sitting down, calmly discussing university classes, but I think things are beginning to change. I've read there's been an increase in people applying for more hands-on schooling or the more trade schools. So I think that generally speaking, that is more in favor of men, our trade schools. And so I think over time there's going to be a change. We're gradually seeing it. And so it's really interesting. I would say keep an eye on Sweden, because I think Sweden's always ahead of the curve on certain issues. And it also has a lot of issues that are parallel to what's happening in the United States. When it comes to the topic of voting, though, I do want to bring something up. I released a research paper. For months, I researched various voter engagement organizations. So voter engagement organizations are pretty important because these are organizations that go out to the public and they basically entice the public to vote. So the main one that people have probably heard about is called Rock the Vote. Are you familiar with it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's been around since the 90s. And I think Rock the Vote has set a platform for other voter engagement organizations. Rock the Vote started with this saying, we want to encourage the youth to vote, and they were a part of or connected with MTV and did all these MTV campaigns. They campaigned with celebrities and musicians and encouraged the youth to register to vote. And so this has become more of a popular thing as time has gone on, is voter engagement. Organizations have propped up. There's now vote.org. There's League of Women Voters, which League of Women Voters has been around for a long time, since the 1920s. But I think League of Women Voters has taken on a little bit similar platform as Rock the Vote. There's an organization called Nonprofit Vote that manages Voter Registration Day, which some people may have heard of that. It's a day designated to encourage Americans to register to vote. There's also student-oriented voter engagement organizations. There's Students Learn, Students Vote, and then there's another one that's called Campus something for voting. There's so many, I start to forget the names. But I published the paper about these, a research paper about these organizations, because I found that these organizations were predominantly left-leaning. But they present themselves as nonpartisan. They'll say, we're nonpartisan, we're here to register, to just encourage all Americans to vote. And from the surface, it looks like they're that way. You know, they have red, white, and blue on their website, they look patriotic and so forth. But as I did some research on these organizations, I found that they only network within progressive networks. They leave out conservative organizations, which to me, that's a critical component of being nonpartisan. That's a little debatable. So they're not going out and telling people who to vote for. They're not saying vote for Hillary Clinton, but you can see in their content, they kind of, those are the voters that they're after. They're after the voters who are likely to vote for Hillary Clinton. And so maybe that plays a role in what you're talking about, if there's higher rates of women voters, because these voter engagement organizations, they are progressive leaning. They're getting millions of dollars, especially when Trump got into office. A few of these voter engagement organizations, if you look at their income statements, they just received millions and millions of dollars for year after year, and primarily to just communicate within progressive circles, progressive organizations. So these can be organizations that focus on race, more left-leaning organizations. They can be organizations that focus on maybe organizations that promote universal health care, organizations that promote eliminating student debt or making university completely free. That's what these voter engagement organizations focus on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, it's sort of natural that women would outnumber men in voting, because of a simple fact that voting tends to lean older, the older population, and and women are just live longer than men do.
That's a good point to bring up. Women do tend to live longer than men, so they can actually impact policy in that regards.
So the fact that they live longer means that they have more years so that they could vote than a man does, on average.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, what's funny about this is, like, people don't even know the history when it comes to voting in America, because a lot of people don't really know history at all in America. I mean, outside of slavery, and that's about it. That's pretty much the of our history.
Even myself, I don't go around and act like I'm a super smart person who knows everything. I'm a millennial, and so I'm like many millennials. I was raised in the public education system in Southern California, and I just remember taking U.S. history in high school, and it was actually a college level course that I took. I was in a more advanced class. And so much information was crammed into this class. I remember we studied every single president in US history. We studied what policies they proposed. We studied what changes happened in the party and the political parties at the time, as well as just social changes. And by the time the class was over, I honestly just felt so fried. You know what I mean? I just had so much information in my head. I remember I didn't even pass that test, and it's just so much to study when it comes to history. And so, yeah, I would say, yes, I do kind of criticize Americans. I wish they would discuss history more often. But at the same time, I think back on when I was in the history class, so much was crammed into one class. I didn't even know that the Democratic Party was affiliated with the KKK. I actually learned that. They probably discussed it. I don't even remember in this history class I took, but I learned that through a meme on Facebook. Like years and years later, there was a meme that came up on Facebook, and it said, "Oh, the KKK was actually started with the Democratic Party started the KKK," And I looked further into it. Oh, it's true. Like I was completely oblivious to that. And I just think sometimes we're overwhelmed with information that, we don't learn certain things or remember certain things, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, well, funny enough, they'll often say that there was a switch in like the 1970s. And I said, really, how have they switched? A lot of the same principles that the Democrats had prior, they still have today. Like, for example, a big thing that slave owners liked is they liked the idea of giving black people, quote unquote, free, free housing, shelter, clothing, food, water, everything like that, because that made the black slaves dependent on them. And what are they
I've
doing
heard,
today?
well, I'm not an expert on that topic. I've heard different perspectives of what happened with the political parties and campaigning and so forth. And yeah, there are many, I would say, briefings of what happened historically that debunk the vague claim. People will vaguely say that the parties switched without saying anything else about it. But there's a lot more to say about the subject, and I can't remember it right off the top of my head right now. But yeah, it's an interesting topic to look into, and it has been debunked. To just simply say, oh, the parties switched. And I think there is a lot of conflict today that you can see within the Democratic Party. And you can see this, it's been pointed out many times, especially by Black conservatives, that the Democratic Party is just set on keeping the Black vote. They present the Black community in a certain way that meets their narrative. And so, yeah, there is some conflict with the Democratic Party in regards to, is it really the party that supports various races? And many people would say that with the Democratic Party now, people of different races are being used as tokens. They're just being put up to give a perspective. Oh, we're the party of diversity. But really, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what I've generally said is that, America, like people will often say about America that our strength is our diversity. And I'm like, no, it isn't. Not really. America's strength is our being able to overcome diversity.
And that has been one of the issues in the U.S. is, I would say, equality. That is an ongoing issue today, and you can see it. I was recently reading a story about a school in Colorado where there was a night that was proposed. It was an activity night specifically for Black families, and it was proposed by an administrator who was supportive of the critical race theory. And it got a lot of press because you have to say, hey, that's starting to cross the line of inequality. It's starting to divide students based on race, which is conflicting with civil rights law. And so I don't know what the status is on that school, but yeah, they had tried to attempt to have an event specifically for Black students. And we see this happening more in public education in the United States. Something I want to bring up that is important too, and I just learned about this case, even though it's been going on since 2014, and I had mentioned it to you, is that there's an organization called Students for Fair Admissions that sued Harvard in 2014 for racially discriminating against Asian Americans in its admissions process. And this is something that's been discussed pretty often. I've heard it. Asian Americans tend to be the top performing students in the United States. Yet, with the onset of affirmative action, where you look at students based on race and you want to have diversity in schools, Asian Americans have been having to deal with more hoops to jump through, more limitations, because they're having to be suppressed because they are the top performing student. It's a really interesting topic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, a common narrative, like you point out with affirmative action, is that it's sort of it's racially discriminatory. And my comment, like a common thing that I actually think is unique in my criticism of it, it's that it's a race to the bottom. You know, where people that don't do well in school are getting more benefits than people that actually do well in school.
That is what's happening, and I think you can see in the University of California system, the UC system in California, they completely dropped SATs as an admission requirement to universities. And this kind of irritated me because I think back to when I was in high school in California, we focused a lot on SATs. I was drilled on, I forget what SAT stands for, but it was, the test to just impress universities to try to get in. And we were drilled so much on it. I remember buying this thick book just to study the SATs. And now it has been dropped as an admission requirement for the UC system. And I think this correlates with having to accommodate to the poorer performing students. So it's not simply about academic performance. Now this is what is a part of Harvard's admissions process that Students for Fair Admissions points out. They look at something called, they have a personality factor in their admissions process, and it's very vague how the personality factor is assessed by an admissions officer. But generally speaking, it's worked against Asian Americans. And so even though they're the top performing students, they are not meeting the personality factor. And there's been blanketed statements made against them as being quiet and homogenous people and so forth, which I was watching a video, someone was going over this case. He said, I mean, imagine if there was blanketed statements made about Black students. It would be completely unacceptable. But yet when it's Asians, it's, they overlook these blanketed statements about them. And I take this to heart because I appreciate top academic performance. I understand it's really hard to do. It takes a lot of hard work. I was a student who graduated with a 4.0 GPA. I worked so hard in school, and it just really frustrates me to think that these students are being systematically declined just because, they don't meet this personality, whatever that is up in the sky, personality requirement of the admissions officers.
I mean, school. The whole purpose of the school is supposed to give people to prepare them for their jobs. And what is personality? If personality is a big thing in jobs, you wouldn't have lawyers.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the work field, that's a more privatized field. So that's something I look at. But personally speaking, this is something that I have always thought about when it comes to affirmative action, and if I go to see a doctor, I want to know that the doctor I'm seeing entered his field of study equally as other doctors. And generally speaking, I want to know that doctors have all had to meet the same requirements to get into their program of study. But as you look, or it can be engineers, anyone who is, especially people who are in critical fields, in the medical field, the engineering fields, scientific research fields, and so forth. But if you're finding that, okay, well, the doctor you're seeing, maybe he was given, he got into the program because he just had a better personality situation or something like that. And maybe he was admitted because he met the diversity requirement more so than the academic requirement. That is something that is really concerning to me when it comes to, again, these very critical fields, is when people who were not top academic performers were able to get in. And who's to say, maybe the university gradually dropped its standards just so that it could have higher graduation rates, which is what's happening. Universities are starting to drop their standards. They've been doing it for a while just to have to accommodate the more lower academic performing students.
Well, yeah, there's also grade inflation where they're giving more kids A's than they rightly need it. They don't, because there's a sort of a taboo against telling a kid that they're not doing well.
Yeah, and I have seen that here in Sweden. I actually have worked as a substitute teacher at a school, and yeah, I have seen very, very poor behaving students at the end of the day be treated the same as the well-behaved students. I have seen students who were not well-behaved still be able to attend the Christmas party, still be able to eat the same food that all the other well-behaved students were able to eat. And so I think this has been a general change over time in the education system to still award the poor behaving students to not offend them. And it's very problematic. I think education, I would say, is probably one of the most critical topics to assess when it comes to pressing issues. And so I don't focus very much on gay rights or even abortion. I think education is a top issue that needs to be tackled. And so that is something that I do bring up pretty frequently in discussions.
Yeah. I mean, when it does come to the topics of abortion, I think a lot of you and more pro-choice people on this side do realize that abortion has sort of been the biggest gateway to corporatism that's ever been invented.
When it comes to,
because, well, think about it this way: now that abortion is legal, now that sort of incentivizes bosses to encourage their women to get abortions so they can keep working them.
generally speaking, I think I've read some surveys that have said abortion rates have been on the decline.
Well, yeah.
Over time.
That's because birth rates have been on a decline.
That's true.
Which our abortion, like Planned Parenthood's freaking out about, by the way.
Yeah, so on the topic of abortion, okay, I like to talk about education more. Like I said, I think that's a more pressing issue. But yeah, I'll talk a little bit about Planned Parenthood because I just don't talk about it very much. And I don't talk about it very much in my circles either. You know, I've been to Planned Parenthood before. I'll just say I've never had an abortion, but I have gone to Planned Parenthood for other services that they provide, because they do provide women with services outside of abortion. Just for health checkups and so forth. And so my experience with Planned Parenthood was, when I went, it was very clinical. Like, I'm just going to share this because I've actually had never talked about it with anyone before. And I think it's something important. When I went, it was like a clinic. It was sterile. It just did not have a family-friendly feeling at all. I did not feel it was geared towards really educating women about options beyond abortion. And then a few years ago, I went to I went to another clinic. Originally I thought I would go to a Planned Parenthood clinic to do a pregnancy test. And I searched near me. I searched Planned Parenthood with where I was located at the time in Southern California, and some kind of birth clinic, pregnancy center popped up. And I
Pregnancy Crisis Center.
It wasn't called specifically a pregnancy crisis center, but it was called the pregnancy center.
Yeah.
And I went, and I thought maybe it would be something similar to Planned Parenthood. I didn't really know. And I went, and it had such a different environment. It was not a place that provided abortion services, and it was a religious oriented center. But when I went, it had a room full of baby clothes. It had a room full of toys. I picked up a brochure when I was there, and it said, you know, we have classes to teach women about breastfeeding. These classes were free of charge. It said we have classes to just teach about genital child care. They even had classes for couples if they were having relationship issues. And I was just really impressed by this location because I thought, you know, imagine being a pregnant woman, probably scared if it was an unplanned pregnancy, and going to this clinic and seeing baby clothes and part of me feels like, for me personally, I just felt it just showed, wow, there's some assistance. There's a place to go to that's providing help. Because women, I would say women increasingly do not know much about pregnancy. They do not know about childcare. With the decrease in birth rates, women are not around children as much as what previous generations of women were. So it's very frightening to, become pregnant and say, oh my God, I've never even changed a diaper. I don't know anything about baby clothes or baby food. There's just so many things that you have to learn. And so I felt that this center was, for me, it was comforting to know, oh, there's all these like resources available if I happen to be pregnant and happen to choose to keep the baby. Compared to Planned Parenthood, where again, it was just a very sterile environment. It had nothing that I remember that kind of gave this warm feeling about being pregnant. It was like a cold feeling at Planned Parenthood. That's probably one of my biggest beefs I have with Planned Parenthood, because I think that the decision to choose an abortion, it's a critical decision. It's more important than what people make it seem. And and then I also read that Planned Parenthood does not offer ultrasounds to women, which plays a big role in choosing to keep the baby.
Yeah, well, the reason why is simple, is that they don't, here's what's funny about it. They offer women ultrasounds when they're at the dentist. Like they say, hey, look, here's your teeth. And, the dentist will show you your own teeth, but they won't show you your own pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
It seems.
Yeah, it is. I think it is pretty on Planned Parenthood's. They offer other services to women. They offer like pap smears and health services. But yeah, they will not. From what I've read, they don't offer ultrasounds, which is pretty crazy in my opinion. If they're going around saying, "Hey, we're here to help women," oh, you don't even offer an ultrasound, because that is. I think if you were to offer it to women, some of them would be interested. Okay. And I read that once a woman sees an ultrasound, or once she hears a heartbeat, she has a much higher chance of choosing to keep the baby.
Well,
and so,
to me, a lot of times is that they'll say it's just like, I know on the Planned Parenthood side, they'll just say it's pro-life propaganda. And I'm like, if a woman's pro-choice going into it, her seeing the ultrasound's really not, if she's very committed to getting an abortion, her seeing an ultrasound's not really going to have any effect. The purpose of it is to let the woman know how far along she is, and she can have more information. The same way if a dentist, when a dentist shows you your teeth, they're trying to show you, like, this is how bad you are. They're trying to give you as much information as you need.
Yeah, I think that's something that is really important I would criticize about Planned Parenthood and the general, I would say, pro-choice movement. So generally speaking, I'm not an expert on the topic, but I do say I lean pro-choice, but I think that there should be a limit sometime in the second trimester. But I totally do think Planned Parenthood is in the wrong for not providing women with information such as an ultrasound, for not providing them information. For example, hey, you can go to a pregnancy center. They have baby clothes, they have toys, they can probably even help with baby food and so forth. There's a lot of resources out there. I think women go to Planned Parenthood feeling very alone. They feel they have a lack of information. They're not shown an ultrasound, and they're not told, hey, there are resources to help you so that you can feel more confident in yourself and you can feel more comfortable with the concept of having a baby. And I think that as time goes on, and again, as I said, as women, they're around children less. We're not around family. Families are more distant. Women know less about childcare. So I can understand women, you become pregnant, maybe they didn't intend to become pregnant. It's very scary to think, oh, what am I going to do to care for this baby? I know nothing about. I remember for me, that was kind of a worry. oh, I've never changed a diaper. I've never done things like that. But there's resources out there to help women, but Planned Parenthood does not share that.
Yeah. Well, the reason why they don't really share a lot of it is mainly due to the reason why they don't promote pregnancy centers a lot is because they view them as competition.
I can understand that. I can see they have a. I don't want to go too into the details, but it's pretty obvious that Planned Parenthood has an objective. It has a mission. Otherwise, it would be more informative to women about opportunities available to them and about their own health and about the status of their baby.
Yeah. Which, obviously I'm a capitalist, so I have no problem with people saying that they have a profit motive in something. It's the only problem I ever have is if they try to make it sound like they're doing something more profound than seeking a profit. Because that's sort of dishonest.
Yeah, and I would say on their behalf, it is also inhumane. And I think that for some women, it's not an issue to abort a child. But for some women, it later does it can haunt women. It can haunt women long after. And maybe they're not aware of that because our society, I think, especially when you're in the left-leaning circles, they make abortion seem like it's nothing. Just go in, get rid of a problem. But, for some women, it will haunt them after. Yeah. Especially when they learn that, hey, there were resources available to me. There were groups that were willing to help me.
Yeah, generally speaking, no matter if you are, even pro-choice doctors, they'll admit if a woman's gone through a traumatic experience beforehand, getting an abortion is not really or any real operation really is not a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously when you're in a traumatic state, like say you've been raped or assaulted, I mean, that's going to cause you to act, irrationally and make more rash judgments.
Yeah, that can be discussed as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would say it is interesting to discuss the pregnancy centers. I wouldn't call them. I know there's pregnancy crisis centers, but also just general pregnancy centers because they don't get enough press, I think.
And I believe what we need to do, I believe this would not actually involve going after abortion itself, but I think what people should do is they should value the family unit more and give women more support and, place motherhood on a higher pedestal than demonizing it. If you actually...
That is my general perspective. I think instead of, and this is something I get a little irritated with Republican groups, is they're just constantly focused on abortion. Like, we want to get rid of abortion completely. We want to, and it's like, okay, well, I have never really liked that plan, so to speak. Again, I've been much more interested in, okay, let's provide more insight about services available to women so that they can feel more comfortable in having a child. Because I feel if you just go and say, we're going to get rid of abortion, again, there's women who are scared. Why are they going to Planned Parenthood? They're scared. I think a lot of women. I think they're just not educated about resources available to them. And so if you're just going around saying, we're going to end abortion and end of story, I don't really hear Republicans speak so much about resources available to women. I see them focus a lot on, we want to get rid of abortion. But the thing is, okay, so what do women, but how do you soften the situation for women to maybe change their perspective? And I think that is where you get into the topic of, as you're saying, talking more about how to value family, how to share resources, maybe these pregnancy centers. Say, hey, maybe you should go to the pregnancy center first, see what's available to you, and then see how you feel. Mm-hmm. And then it's good to know when people are more well-rounded, like knowledge-wise on a topic. I would like to see that being more of a focus of conservative groups rather than just outright banning abortion.
I mean, yeah, especially if, because a big thing like many women will say is that
her relationship with the father of the child is a great influence on her if she will pursue an abortion or not. So I believe if we have a more male positive and father, or more specifically father positive movement that, really is more pro family, that will in a way sort of, because most of the women that get abortions are single and they don't really have that great of a relationship with the man that's the father. So I figure if you target that aspect of it, where you encourage the family and you promote more positive family models, that's sort of going to solve it in of itself, and it makes people better off anyway.
And I think that would solve so many more things too, other than abortion.
Yeah.
If we've kind of, that's been an ongoing theme in our conversation. It's just how the traditional family wearing down, how it has impacted so much. From just women's choices to giving birth, it impacts abortion, choice for abortion. It impacts how children perceive the world. If they're being raised in a single parent household. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to knock on single parents. It's very hard, I know. But I definitely think there should be much more focus on just educating people about resources. Sometimes I say we should go back in time a little bit when it comes to the family model, when it comes to family values, and think a little bit more of the past and how to integrate that into the future again, and how to integrate that into now, so that we can have a more, again, just a more pro-family household, traditional values in many ways when it comes to the family household.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we've been going on for an hour and 40 minutes. I have to get some stuff done, but it was so nice talking to you. Can you tell the audience about your, projects you're up to, where they can find you and the like?
Well, I'll draw attention again to the research paper that is available online. I put together a lot of research about voter engagement organizations. That is a pressing topic to me. I think that we should definitely, especially in the conservative arena, I think there needs to be more focus on voter engagement, on getting out and encouraging people to vote, because the left-leaning groups that present themselves as nonpartisan, they are very active. Again, they're getting millions of dollars. They are a part of so much. They are integrated into Hollywood. They're integrated into corporations. They're integrated into the tech companies. It's amazing. And so this paper that I released, it's a PDF format available online at republicanatheist.com. It gives insight into this network. It's a very involved paper. It's long and it's kind of technical, but again, if you assess it, you can see how these left-leaning voter engagement organizations are really harnessing the Democrat voter, I would say. So I think in the conservative arena, there needs to be much more effort to entice people to vote. I think Trump did a great job on that because he was just such a, I would say, entertainer when he spoke, and he really got, I would say, the conservative arena, he gave it a spurt of energy. But now he's not in office anymore, so this is something that the Republican Party needs to think about. This is something that people who value more conservative values need to think about, is how to engage with voters and encourage people to vote. Another thing I want to bring up is, so I had mentioned the case against Harvard filed by Students for Fair Admissions. And I didn't mention that the case is ongoing. It's going to be discussed by the Supreme Court sometime this year. I don't know exactly when. And then a decision should be made by June 2023, I read. So I'm very interested in the outcome of this case, because if the Supreme Court sides in favor with Students for Fair Admissions and against Harvard, it will really throw a loop in for affirmative action. It can change the admissions process for universities across the country. And I'm really interested to see what happens. And it's amazing that the Supreme Court is even taking on this case. And finally, just to hear more about me, I do manage Republican Atheists, so that's republicanatheist.com. You can read more about what we do there. And then I also have my personal website, laurenelltalk.com. That's Lauren Ell, E-L-L talk.com. And I post blogs there occasionally.
So that's good. Make sure to check her out, everyone. Well, this is Mr. Brass. This has been the Brass Exchange, and thank you all.